This is Eleazar Ruiz, and you're listening to Sunny Brands, a podcast where we explore the relationship between purpose, branding, and impact. On each episode, I interview the heroes behind the brands that make our world a better place. In this episode, we'll be talking with Nkosana Moyo, a senior manager of global storytelling at Adidas. Nkosana is a close friend, and he's one of those optimistic people. The reason we have him on the show is because he's one of the inspirations for Dream Night, our program and pro bono initiative that funds creative efforts for minority-led brands. In this interview, I want to give you a behind the scenes of the sort of conversations me and him would have, from student loans to how to engage our communities. Let's welcome Nkosana.
Originally from Zimbabwe. I spent about 4 years there after birth, if you could say. 4 years in Zimbabwe, and then I moved to the States when I was roughly, 5, early grade school, kindergarten, first grade age. I lived in the Washington, D.C. area, which is nicknamed Chocolate City, for those of y'all who don't know.
I didn't know that.
Chocolate City is the nickname. Some think the nation's capital, but in fact, it's Chocolate City.
Okay.
I grew up there, bopping up and down the D.C., Maryland, kind of Virginia borders. Grew up single-family household. And from early on, I think in terms of where my heartbeat and my interests were, it was always around sports. That was kind of the genesis of personal hobbies and interests for me was athletics. And I think a large reason for athletics was there was a commonality and a common language that a kid in Zimbabwe understood sports in the same way that a kid in America understood sports. And so from a very early age, the idea of commonality began to be, I guess, a bit of a theme and something that I would, as an individual, kind of desire and seek after. Is what are those things that kind of bridge some of the gaps that exist naturally within culture? So growing up, I was big into sports. I played football. I ran track. Those are my kind of two sports of focus for me. After I graduated from high school, I went to university and I actually studied sport management. It was a business degree that had an emphasis on sport. Again, with the idea of what are the kind of common themes and the commonalities that exist. And my original plan was to move back to either Zimbabwe or South Africa and actually do sports camps. That was my original plan. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I had no idea.
Yeah, that was my original plan, was to move back and do sports camps. But I had this thing called student loans. I don't know if you heard of those.
No.
Student loans?
Yeah. I didn't get one.
Okay.
But, my wife.
Yeah. So therefore you got some. Yeah.
She made me pay for those.
Okay, yeah. So I had those. I didn't have a wife to pay for mine. So that kind of led me to saying, hey, I need to stay stateside a little bit longer. And I kind of began my professional career working in a field that I didn't have a lot of personal interest in, but it was kind of what I could do right away. So I started off working in sports. I did an entry-level ticket sales job in Atlanta for the Atlanta Hawks.
Awesome.
And so that was kind of like the beginning of my professional career, which is very different from what I do and what I'm about now, working in sales per se. But I think from the very beginning in that job in sales, that's where some of the themes in which I kind of view branding through started to pop up. And then from there, I transitioned to a role that was a bit more account management, heavily relational based. And then from there, I went to a job that was a sponsorship partnership type of role.
Yeah.
So taking some of the account management, taking some of the kind of human sales skills and ability to connect with outside people that you're trying to get into your business. And then that role also involved a bit of what we would call activation. So that's creating an experience, a tangible real life experience that is an expression of whatever your brand is, or whatever you want your brand to represent. So that was the role that started really introducing more traditional quote unquote marketing themes. But again, the sales role, the account management role, the relationship roles, those were pivotal in starting to form what that would now look like and how I kind of view marketing and activation through. And then from there, that's when I left that job and I entered into kind of my first traditional marketing role, which was here in Portland, Oregon at Nike. And so I spent about a year there, and up until now, which I've been in a similar brand strategy communications role at Adidas for the last couple of years.
Both Nkosana and I live in Portland, Oregon, a city that has faced several challenges in recent years, particularly during the pandemic. It's easy to encounter cynicism, individualism, and paralysis in this environment. Nkosana's perspective on our cultural problems was a valuable framework that inspired the creation of Dream Night. Let's hear how he perceives the rooted issue that Dream Night is trying to address.
It's a greater reflection of where the world is right now, and it is it's another side of the same coin. So on one hand, we are the most mobile and transient that we've ever been. We all get to enjoy the wonders and the gifts of being able to choose where we want to live. We can start somewhere, but we can also go anywhere. And we're no longer confined to specific environments that we grew up in. We kind of have autonomy to go and to do our own thing and to carve our own path, if you will. But with that, the other side of that, right? On one hand, that's an incredibly positive thing, the fact that we have that autonomy. But on the other side of that is we become wanderers and sojourners to a degree that are that show up in locations for a specific purpose, and that purpose might not be aligned with the location that we're actually showing up in. And so there's now a disconnect to where we're consumers that show up in an environment to consume, and as soon as the environment is no longer conducive for consuming, what do? We find the next.
Right.
And we move on.
Right.
And because we have a Rolodex of options.
Which is common. Like, everybody does it.
We all do it. I do it.
Yeah.
I was Zimbabwe to DC, to Maryland, back to DC, to Virginia, to Central Virginia, to Atlanta, to Philadelphia, to Portland, right?
Yeah.
And so seeing that all the way through and seeing some of the differences in cities. And I remember being in the Atlanta area, the first question you would always ask somebody is, where are you from? Because nobody's from Atlanta.
Right.
Nobody's from Atlanta.
Yeah, they expect you to be from somewhere
When I moved to Philadelphia, you would never ask that question. Because everyone would look at you with a puzzled look on their face. Like, where do you think I'm from? I'm from Jersey. I'm from South Jersey. I'm from Montgomery County, or I'm from Delaware. Like, where else would I be from? I'm from Philly. Like, this is home, right? And so because of that, there's a spirit of ownership that I think people in Philadelphia take. This is their home. This is where their family is at. This is where their community is at. And so, though it got problems, and Philly has no shortage of challenges that it faces, there's not the same level of cynicism that exists there. Because people didn't show up to consume. They showed up because it's home, and this is their community. And so there's already a difference. Whereas in Portland, it's a much more transient town, right?
Right.
And so when the things that you show up to Portland to consume are no longer giving you the same things to consume, and there's now additional challenges, right? The product that you came here for is no longer the same product, which is going to be a natural reaction.
Right.
Right? And naturally, you can see how a spirit of cynicism can start to creep in, is when the very thing that you signed up for is no longer the same thing. And now you're like, well, why am I here? Why am I here if the thing that I came here for no longer exists?
Right.
And so that was thematically, I think, from town to town. And I don't think it's anything specific to Portland. I don't think it's anything specific to Philly, Atlanta. This is just how I think the world works.
Right.
When you have people that are from a place, they tend to have a bit more ownership of it and its problems. But when you have people that are not from a place, that can be a challenge. Is on the positive side, you get an influx of people with gifts and talents that can contribute, right? But then on the other side of that is you also get that when the problems start arising and they don't have the same ownership. It's not theirs, it's a rental car. Now what happens?
So how do we fix it? How do we think about our part as individuals? Certainly, one person cannot change all the systemic issues we encounter, right?
What does it look like to engage with those in a really meaningful and compelling way? So that's number one, is identifying the audience and having a very clear problem. And I think the very clear problem that exists in our audience is cynicism. Cynicism. And cynicism is almost the opposite of what you would say hope. When you lack hope, you become a cynic. And the reality is the cynical hands aren't helpful hands. And so if you want to address a problem, the cynical hands aren't going to be the one to be able to do that or be able to do so in love. And with the right amount of care that you would hope that those hands would be able to do that. So number one, identifying your audience. Number two, identifying the problem, which I would say is cynicism. And then number three, recognizing what we want people to do, which is a twofold. I would say number one, it's recognizing that you have the ability to actually make an impact in somebody's life. And the solution isn't coming from the local officials, which again, not any, in no ways is a slight to local officials, but in reality, the challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis, many of them, like our local officials, just aren't equipped and there to be able to handle, right? And so from that is the bedrock of how do we think through building this into a framework to get people to feel like, number one, I have something to contribute, and number two, it's not hopeless. And the very ability for myself to engage with these problems is a very powerful tool in negating some of the hopelessness that we all feel. Because it's human, right? And this is something I think it's being able to empathize with the challenges and not look at the challenges as somebody over there is feeling X, Y, Z. But realize, man, we all wake up some days and just feel incredibly hopeless about a situation. And feel incredibly hopeless about the community that we're in. And we feel incredibly immobilized of where do we even begin? What do we do? How do we even begin to like broach these challenges that seem so indwelt and so deeply ingrained into the fibers of our society? And so how do we start to get people to recognize that, number one, that's human, and it's okay. And number two, that there's actually something that we can do about it. None of us are ever really going to fully fix Portland. We're never going to be able to fix all the challenges and issues faced by our city. But like any good parent or friend, your best parents, the best parents and your best friends, none of them will actually fix your problems, but they show up when you have them. And in the same way, we want Dream Night to be a reflection of that. Is we may not be able to fix everything, but we're going to show up when our city has challenges. We're going to show up when the people in our community are facing issues. And again, we may not be able to fix everything, but that's okay, but we're going to show up.
One night, Nkosana and I were discussing cynicism. He used the analogy of a garden to illustrate the concept of ownership, or the lack thereof. This was incredibly helpful in my understanding of my role within the collective needed to affect change. Check this out.
This idea that all of us have been placed in a garden. And in the garden that we all live in, there's grass, there's bushes, there's trees, there's shrubs, there's soil, there's all of these different things. And we all know, as a recent homeowner for the first time, and I grew up in cities, so growing up I didn't really have lawns and gardens to take care of. So this is a learning by yeah, a lot of learning, especially now that it's springtime. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that grew.
My yard is exploding.
Yeah, exactly. And there's an element of, if you do not take care of the garden, who will? And recognizing that each element of the garden requires different care. And requires different care for different seasons, right? And so the way that you would cut your grass and the approach that you would have to cutting grass is different than the way that you would approach potential shrubs, right? Like use different tools, it requires different gifts, it requires different expertise, all of which are different. And recognizing that in the same way, the needs of our Portland garden are very different. It's not all just cutting grass. It's not a one fix all for everything. And because of that, you don't just need people that are good at brand marketing to address all the challenges that exist in Portland. You need people that are nice in marketing. You need people that are great with finances to help a business, let's say. You need people that are gifted with like legal rhetoric and have an incredible legal understanding. You need people that are medical professionals. You need people that are great, quote unquote, literal gardeners that understand food and nutrition and all of these other things. It takes all of these different skill sets to be able to valuably input into a community. Right. And so I think the ambition here of Dream Night is to recognize Portland as the garden. And we need somebody on the shrubs. and we need somebody to cut the grass, and we need somebody to tend to the soil, and we need somebody to maybe water the flowers, and we need somebody to maybe rake the leaves in the fall. We need somebody to fill in the blank other things that go in with taking care of a garden, and recognizing that all of those people are here.
And in the case of your home,
Yeah.
your home,
Yeah.
you're never gonna wake up one morning
Yep.
and show up on the street and ask your neighbor,
What's up with my grass? Exactly.
Like-
There's an element. If it would be folly
yeah,
if I, as the homeowner, went out complaining about how my grass is overgrown.
right,
That would be odd, if you will. If I, as a homeowner, was like, "Yo, what's up with this grass? Can somebody come deal with this grass?"
right,
Everyone around me
like
would be looking at me and say, "What? That's your grass. You need to cut your grass.
Yeah.
Or you need to learn how to tend your garden."
Oh, you didn't know that when you bought the house?
Yeah.
There's no HOA here.
Yeah. And honestly, that was a big learning for me. Is I remember after the first few months, walking outside and for the first time recognizing that like stuff is kind of overgrown, and that was really the first time it clicked for me. If like, oh, no one's coming to cut my grass. And oh, this tree and these like weeds that are growing all over the place, no one's coming to pull them. No one's coming to trim these wedges that I have on the side here. No one's coming to put new soil and sod on the top of this bed here. No one's coming to do that. It's only going to come from those who live in this home, which happens just to be me.
Right.
You know, like it's me.
Yep.
And so the responsibility falls on me.
Out of this conversation, Dream Night is born. Dream Night is an initiative that has been created with the sole purpose of providing pro bono design services to minority-led businesses and organizations. Year after year, AtNotion commits to donating a minimum of 5% of our gross revenue to help underserved communities by offering branding, web design, and development services completely free of charge. In this portion, Nkosana speaks to the origin story of what ended up being Dream Night.
From recognizing our audience, our problem, and what we want our antidote to the problem to be, myself and a few other friends in our community started getting together. It was actually one specific night when we were sitting in a room thinking to ourselves, almost dreaming, if you will, about what does a Portland that is full of hope look like? And what is a Portland that is no longer a hotbed of cynicism and really unhelpful global like news headlines and known for all of these things that aren't necessarily the most flattering things? What would it look like for us to flip the script on that? And what would a redeemed version of Portland look like? How do we start to dream about that? And from there was this idea of Dream Night. Is what does it look like to get a bunch of friends together in a room, recognizing all the different gifts that exist within that room, and say, hey, based on what we're all already good at, how can we use these tools and these gifts that we already have as a vehicle for helping the people around us and helping our community? And that, in many ways, was the genesis of Dream Night. Is a bunch of homies getting together in a room and dreaming about the Portland that they want to see. And it also just so happened to be in the evening, a la the name, Dream Night. And then the thought became, then how do we scale this idea? How do we scale this idea of getting people that feel like they have nothing to contribute? And so their only option is to leave. How do we scale that idea to invite them into this kind of world of dreaming together and creating solutions and using the things that we are already good at? Gifts are already here, right? Everything that Portland needs to heal is in Portland. We don't need to look outside. It's already here. And the brilliance exists all around us, right? It's just about harvesting it now and making sure that we use those resources and cultivate those resources and encourage those resources well to make sure that we're actually like, we're to see ourselves bringing light and hope and redemption to it. So that was the genesis of the idea and the spirit of Dream Night.
What are the 3 ideas you gotta embrace in order to be a force of change in your community? Ready for the answer? Let's hear it.
For us, in many ways, this was predicated on having very clear values for whatever this kind of Dream Night idea is, having a very core kind of like pinnacle values. And our 3 values were presence, as we discussed, the idea of we can't fix everything, but we can show up. A good friend can't fix all your problems. Good friends show up when you have them, right? Presence. The second one being simplicity. It doesn't need to be complicated, right? We're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're not trying to do anything that's outside of what we're already good at.
Right.
You, in and of yourself, what you naturally do well, that's enough. And there's a place where that thing that's inside of you, your giftings, whatever that looks like, there's a place where that can actually be a help for somebody else, right? So this idea of simplicity and not needing to reinvent the wheel here in terms of like our audience, right? And then the third one was just hope. And I think hope is critical because there's so many, and I feel it just from a human level, right? I feel the daily reasons to do and to feel hopeless, right? I feel the pull, the daily like tug towards like, this isn't gonna work. The daily pull towards, is it even worth it? The daily pull towards, this is gonna work. And how do we create an environment within Dream Night where there's no bad ideas, right? And that's a bit of a cliche to say there's no bad ideas, but let's throw out, as we communicate with one another, let's throw out that cynical filter that we already like use to remove ideas that we will potentially have. And so how do we get back to a place where we didn't have that cynical filter, right? We didn't have that thing inside of us that it's been like beat to a pulp. And so now to protect ourselves, we think of all the reasons why something won't work. And trying to think back to a time when life was really simple. And think back to a time when like my mind wasn't divided in 40 different directions and there was a bit of a presence that I had with the things that I was doing. And get back to a time when life was filled with hope. And that was as a kid, yo. That was in the 90s. That was in, for some of our, older in our target demographic range, that was in the 80s. That was in a time for us that didn't lack challenges and didn't lack problems. There was plenty of things that were wrong in the world in the 90s and 80s. But as a kid, there was an element of hope. I could be whatever I wanted to be when I grew up, right? Even as an immigrant kid, right? There was that spirit of I can be whatever I want to be. And I can create a different world for myself than maybe I had created for me, right? And there was a simplicity in the things that we were interested in. It was nerds rope and like really bad candy and like and cereal that was filled with sugar and TV shows like Arthur and Zoom. But there was a simplicity, right? Like growing up, we didn't have cable. So it was like PBS, right? So there was like 3 channels I could watch. There wasn't 40 streaming networks with 40 movies and 40 shows that are available on my phone, on my computer,
Boredom
on my TV.
still existed.
Exactly. You could be bored, yo.
By boredom.
You'll be chilling in there bored, like really bored. I can't remember the last time I was bored, you know what I mean? Like just really, like I'm bored. And so kind of getting back to a time and a place where that was a lot more prevalent. And as an individual, where there was hope, simplicity, and presence, where I had to be anywhere except for where I was. Unless my mama told me, we going somewhere else. And it was like, all right, that's what's up. But the ability to just show up for the things that I was doing without being preoccupied with what's happening on my phone, what's happening with the game, let me check the this, let me check the that, what's my email, what's my this, what's my job saying, what's my this saying, all of these things kind of simultaneously, right? But get back to the days in which if you needed to reach me, you called the house phone. Think about that. You didn't text me, you called the house phone, right? And the mental clarity that kind of came with that. And as we started reflecting on that period, there's just this like almost correction that takes place of like all the bad stuff. You just don't even think about it, but you just think of like all the joyful, beautiful moments. And so in many ways, we wanted to reflect that as we started thinking through what do we want this to look like? And more importantly than what it should look like, what should it feel like? And so how do we capture the essence of what we want it to feel like in the creative?
The absence where I used to say, I want to be an astronaut. Like how do you capture the essence of that visually? And we landed on a super fun, like very dreamy, pun intended, like visuals. I
Yeah.
think we landed with like, we're using like this pop of yellow,
Yeah.
bubbly font,
Yeah.
using like print paper, like when you used to like scan.
Yeah, scan, and then you would cut stuff out of the newspaper, or
Yeah.
like rip it out.
Yeah.
Back when we had newspapers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you would like take glue,
Yeah.
and you would glue it to something,
Yeah.
and you would create like a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So like a lot of the visuals feel very like tangible, tactile,
Yeah.
less digital. And when we went digital, if we're showing any digital references, we're like going back to like Microsoft Windows 98.
The early joint,
Yeah.
95, yo.
Yeah.
Early joint.
Pixelated, you know,
yo.
8-bit,
Yeah.
you know. Like
Dial up. We dial like it's
Yeah, yeah.
So it's still dialing where you
Yeah.
can't dial up because you're on the house. Like
Yeah.
very to a simpler time.
Don't forget
You
to
know what I mean?
dream.
Yeah.
It's like that
And-
idea.
Yeah.
People are curious to kind of like, hey, okay, I want to know more. Whenever
Yeah.
something happens, I want to be in the loop. I want to know. Where can they do that?
Follow at Dream Night PDX.
All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Appreciate your time, man. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for watching. At Notion is a B Corp and award-winning branding agency. We help responsible brands launch. If you're curious about how we can help you, you can check out our website, atnotion.com, and see for yourself. Thanks.